I'd like to first off thank Wendy Cromash and the Levy Center for inviting me here today to speak with you about some topics that are near and dear to my heart. First of all, it's always good to virtually visit, if not visit in person, Evanston, because this is the town I was born in. I won't say what year, but several years ago, right in Evanston Hospital. My dad went to Evanston High School, and I met my wife, Leslie Goddard, who some of you may know from some of the presentations here. I met her when she invited me to give a talk at the Evanston History Center. I remember we met at Tommy Nevin's bar and hit it off, and the rest, I guess, is sort of history. But today I'm going to be talking about the films of the Civil War. And Wendy was nice enough to say that one of my passions, of course, is the Civil War. What she didn't mention, though, is that for a while there, I was a movie extra. I was involved in movies. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was one of them. Home Alone. I got to confess, you'll never see me on the screen because all those scenes were cut. But I've always been a huge fan of movies, as well as a huge fan of history and the Civil War. So today, I'd like to think that this kind of talk goes right down my alley. I'll take a second here to try and get a shared screen here of, gotta wait for a second here to get this. Come on. From the beginning here. There we go. There we go. Again, my talk is films of the Civil War. And it is said by many that newspapers are the first draft of history. Today I'm going to be looking about some movies about the American Civil War and how those movies have impacted, for better or for worse, this pivotal context of our history, and how they've reflected both American culture and, conversely, have impacted American culture. I maintain that if newspapers are the first draft of histories, then maybe movies can be considered the last or final draft of history. Today, first I'm going to be doing a brief history and review of Civil War films. Second, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the major themes of such films, and I'm going to be focusing a lot, but not entirely, on 3 Civil War films: Gone with the Wind, Shenandoah, and Glory. And third, I'm going to take a look at the historical accuracy of these films, if they are indeed accurate at all. Well, here's a list of the 20 movies of the Civil War.
Find them.
Okay, well, when do you just go ahead without them then?
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the Civil War is the nation's greatest conflict. In the words of historian Jack Davis, the biggest event in our history belongs on the biggest movie canvas that humans can devise. Now, in all, there have been more than 100 movies on the Civil War. Some of them are very good. Some of them are very bad. We've had our best actors in these movies: Clark Gable, Errol Flynn, Daniel Day-Lewis, Morgan Freeman, Jimmy Stewart, Clint Eastwood. Name them, they've been in a Civil War movie. We've had our best actresses in Civil War movies: Elizabeth Taylor, Vivian Leigh, Meryl Streep, Katharine Hepburn, the late Olivia de Havilland. We've had our best directors doing Civil War movies: John Huston, D.W. Griffith, Ang Lee, Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Sam Peckinpah, John Ford, William Wyler. Civil War movies include what is perhaps the best movie ever made, Gone with the Wind. Civil War movies also include perhaps the worst movie ever made, 1968's Journey to Shiloh, starring a young Harrison Ford. If you take anything away from this presentation, take away this: never, ever watch that movie. Civil War films have had the best theme music. Gone with the Wind's theme. Da, 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 da. Perhaps the best movie title song from Friendly Persuasion, The I Love. Civil War movies also have perhaps the worst song ever written by a great songwriter, the famous Johnny Mercer, who wrote the theme song for Alvarez Kelly. Unfortunately, when they were making the movie, they told Mercer, whatever you do, the lyrics got to rhyme with Alvarez Kelly. And Mercer said, I'm the best lyricist in the world, but even I can't find rhymes for the words Alvarez Kelly. As historian Brian Wills has observed, in the case of the Civil War, the tableau is rich in color, conflict, and character. Yet some producers, performers, and directors have less interest in or knowledge of the demands of history than others. Many will use the war as a mere backdrop or context rather than seek to inform the audiences of their issues and the complexities of struggles. And often they cast the struggle in the most simplistic terms. What I won't be covering today: Three Stooges movies about the Civil War, comedy shorts, movies like John Carter. It was a Disney movie about a Confederate deserter who somehow ends up on planet Mars. No, those are not the movies I'm going to be covering today. Why does Hollywood make movie? Well, take a look at that $ below on your screen. Filmmakers are usually more concerned with making an entertaining film rather than a historically accurate film. And here's one Hollywood director being quoted as saying, Civil War movies never make money. Well, there's some truth to that. At least until Gone with the Wind, Civil War movies were often flops at the box office. For example, there was a 1935 film called So Red the Rose. It was off a best-selling novel, sort of like an early Gone with the Wind type thing, and it bombed at the box office. That's one of the reasons why some movie makers were afraid to approach Gone with the Wind, the very successful novel, and make that into a movie. But of course, with Gone with the Wind, that was turned on its head. When that director claimed that Civil War movies don't succeed at the box office, he must have deliberately ignored the success of Gone with the Wind. In fact, the movie grossed $198 million since its release in 1939. May not sound like much today, but when you adjust for inflation, that's the equivalent of a $1.5 billion gross from a movie being released today. Considering inflation, that's more than the Star Wars movie made, the first Star Wars movie, more than Sound of Music made, more than Titanic, more than Jaws. That's a success by any standard. And it's not just the people buying tickets that attest to the success of the movie. Take a look at this. Here's the book or the movie being translated into, let's see, German, Polish, almost any language you can think of. The movie also spawned, well, t-shirts, dolls, games, anything, Franklin Mint plates, anything you could think of, this movie spawned. And with that, movie makers were a lot more willing to make a Civil War themed movie than before. Of course, we're not talking, Civil War movies do not start with 1939 and Gone with the Wind. There are many silent movies about the Civil War too. In fact, probably more silent movies about the Civil War than talking movies. Now, the above picture there is from a classic scene of the 1950 movie Birth of a Nation. But one of the earliest Civil War movies was in 1908, The Guerrilla by D.W. Griffith, a famed director. The plot involves a heroic Union soldier who broke through the enemy lines to rescue his Southern girlfriend from the clutches of a dastardly Confederate renegade. It may seem like an unlikely vehicle for the great director Griffith until you realize that his father was a Confederate Army major, Jacob Griffith. There were other Civil War themed silent movies in the early 1900s, and it's not hard to see why they were popular with the audiences. you remember is the people who were going to movies in the 1900s, many of them were in fact Civil War veterans who were still alive, and the children of those veterans who wanted to see what the conflict was all about that their fathers were so involved in. I said I'd be focusing on three movies, basically. And these are the three. Gone with the Wind from 1939. That's from a blockbuster novel by Margaret Mitchell. The novel sold so many copies you can't believe it. Shenandoah, 1964. Jimmy Stewart plays an anti-war Virginia farmer who tries to keep his family out of the approaching conflict, but fails. His farm is looted, one son is killed by Confederate deserters, and he embarks on a one-man quest to save his young son from a Union prison. Glory is a more modern movie. It's about Colonel Robert Gould Shaw in the 54th Massachusetts African-American regiment he raises and trains. About that regiment's trials, about its formation, about its bloody repulse in the final battle. And talks about larger themes, of course, about the conflict. Movies have varying backgrounds. Gone with the Wind was based on a blockbuster novel, but they had a lot of trouble making it into a movie. In fact, they had 3 different directors at this movie, and probably a 4th unofficially too. You know, perhaps the story of the casting of Scarlett O'Hara, how they went through every actress in Hollywood until they found Vivien Leigh. Shenandoah was based on a script that had an anti-war theme, and it was in fact turned into a Broadway musical after it appeared on the screen. Now, Glory has a civil rights theme, and it's based in large part on Shaw's actual letters. We'll talk about the historical accuracy of these movies later, but for right now, all 3 movies have a fairly solid Civil War historical background to them. The actors, I touched about the actors, but in these 3 movies, it's sort of interesting. For example, in Shenandoah, we have a Southerner named Charlie Anderson. And who do they get to play him? A Northern actor, Jimmy Stewart. The Southerners in these movies are rarely played by Southern actors, in fact. Gone with the Wind, the stars are Clark Gable from Ohio, and 3 Britishers, Vivien Leigh, Olivia de Havilland, and Leslie Howard. Scarlett's father is played by the Irish-American actor Thomas Mitchell. And that it's sort of odd to think about it, but it continues today. Think about The Conspirators, starred 2 well-known and very good, by the way, British actors, James McAvoy and Tom Wilkinson. Cold Mountain, that featured Aussies Nicole Kidman and a Brit, Jude Law. Lincoln, who played Lincoln in Lincoln? An Irishman, Daniel Day-Lewis. They had a Southern-born guy, Tommy Lee Jones, in the movie. Who they have him play? A Northern congressman named Thaddeus Stevens. Well, these movies all seem to have different themes, or at least the bigger ones seem to have different themes. Birth of a Nation in 1950 was based on a best-selling book, The Klansman, by a guy from North Carolina who basically wrote the stories of his uncle, who had been a Confederate veteran. Gone with the Wind is based on a best-selling novel written by an Atlanta journalist named Margaret Mitchell. They seem to have different causes for the war too. First 2 movies, the Yankees, they aren't very explicit about the cause, but it's sort of vaguely that the Yankees caused the war somehow or another. Red Badge of Courage, there's really no discussion about it. Glory, Obviously, the Emancipation or abolition causes the war in some fashion or another. And that's the same with the Lincoln movie from 2012. Again, they aren't explicit about it, but to quote Lincoln, everybody knew that slavery was somehow the root cause of the war. The movies have a different attitude toward war in general. And usually they deplore the war as a tragedy, especially the more modern movies. Now, again, depicted on your screen is a scene from the movie Shenandoah where Jimmy Stewart is hunting for his missing son. The Civil War has been a problem for filmmakers because, unlike other war movies can be portrayed as us against them. World War II movie, us against the Germans or us against the Japanese or something, like in Saving Private Ryan. But in this war, us fought us. And that's unique in American history. Shenandoah explores this theme, I think, more than most of the other movies do. Now, early in the film, Jimmy Stewart's sons remarks that as Virginians, they can no longer ignore the war. Now, Jimmy Stewart asks his son if they desire to own slaves. When they answer no, Stewart asks them further. Now, suppose you had a friend that owned slaves, and suppose somebody was going to come and take them away from him. Would you help him fight to keep them? The sons again say, no, I wouldn't. Later, when a Confederate recruiting officer comes to Jimmy Stewart's farm and tells him that Virginia needs, quote, all her sons, Stewart replies that he built his farm, quote, without the sweat of one slave, and that these are my sons. They don't belong to the state. They don't belong to the Confederacy. In the movie Confederate Deserters, not the Yankees kill one of his sons and his beloved daughter-in-law. Standing by their graves, Stewart sums up the movie's attitude toward war. There's nothing much I can tell you about this war. It's like all wars, I suppose. The undertakers are winning it. The politicians will talk a lot about the glory of it. The old men will talk about the need for it. The soldiers, they just want to go home. Depictions of Union soldiers vary, of course, with the movie. Again, I'm showing you scenes from Glory and from Red Badge of Courage. Now, in Gone with the Wind, you don't see Union soldiers. They're just called the Yankees, and they're sort of in the distance they're referred to. Or Sherman. General Sherman's name is used as a proxy for all Union soldiers. In the older movies, there wasn't much exploration of why the soldiers fought. Modern movies focus a lot more on the motivations of the soldiers. Glory advances the notion that many Northerners, and black troops especially, fought for human freedom, for the abolition of slavery, rather than the Union itself. Now, of course, many did, including my own great-grandfather. Many didn't. People's motives for war and for fighting in war, of course, always mixed. In Gettysburg, there's a discussion between the colonel and his favorite sergeant about why they're fighting. Colonel Chamberlain says he's doing it because he wants to abolish slavery. The sergeant said he's not fighting for anybody else's freedom, but for justice. There's also a theme of disillusionment. There's a movie called Pharaoh's Army, where the lead character asks his soldiers, Union soldiers, why they joined up. One said because he was bored. Another to see new places. Now the captain who was asking the questions tells him he signed up to end slavery, but it seems that what he's ended up doing is pacifying a non-slave holding area and mostly stealing chickens. Depictions of Confederate soldiers vary also. On the left, you can see the immaculately uniformed actor Doug McClure, with a perfect Confederate uniform. On the top right, you can see Matthew McConaughey, a little more disheveled dress, probably more like what the average Confederate soldier dressed like. The older movies quite often featured Confederate officers. More modern movies, the ones that pick Confederate soldiers, depict either common soldiers or people like guerrillas, like in the outlaw Josie Wales or Ride with the Devil. Vigilantes, like in Cold Mountain. And in The Free State of Jones, Matthew McConaughey portrays somebody who's fighting against the Confederate Army, against being drafted. There's little discussion in the early movies of why these Confederates are risking their lives. To the extent they do, it's localism or state loyalty, or they just don't like Northerners. There's also a theme, again, in especially early movies, called battlefield reconciliation. In Red Badge of Courage, Audie Murphy is warned by a Reb soldier to duck before he gets shots. And this scene is repeated in movie after movie after movie, where there's this sort of like battlefield camaraderie between Confederates and Northern soldiers. In the movie Gettysburg, in fact, one of the main themes is the intense friendship between Confederate General Armistead and Union General Winfield Scott Hancock. Gone with the Wind and other movies are famous for portraying this old South. All plantations, parties, and mint juleps. The Old South is a term for the antebellum or pre-Civil War Southern states that, in some movie at least, give a visual image of a South where almost everyone lives on a plantation and life consists of an endless number of parties and romances. The reality of the South, and of course of the U.S. as a whole, was far different. Plantation owners were a very small minority, even in the South. The majority of Southerners and Americans at this time were farmers. The introduction to the movie Gone with the Wind speaks of a lost, genteel civilization of the Old South. That intro, by the way, was added by the movie makers. It's not in Mitchell's book. However, Gone with the Wind touches on the reality of the South, in part by making its central family, the O'Haras, not aristocrats like their neighbors, the Wilkses, but a family whose head is a poor Irish immigrant. Not born to plantation life, who makes a fortune on his own, buys a plantation, and adopts the plantation culture and mindset. Now, more modern movies like Shenandoah, Ride with the Devil, Cold Mountain, they dispense with the plantation style entirely and instead focus on the truer South. Hardscrabble farmers, ordinary people caught up in a conflict which ruins their lives and economies. Of course, this image was one of the famous scenes from Gone with the Wind. It's showing the Atlanta hospital. It's, again, one of the great bits of movie making of all time. It's a story. There are actually very few actual human beings there. There, 3/4 of the people there, the so-called soldiers, are in fact dummies. They were just put down to look like Confederate soldiers. And this is shot from a crane from above, because if they'd have shot it at ground level, you would have seen the spires of San Francisco, of Los Angeles in the background. Now, what is a lost cause theme? In movies, it's often been reduced to 3 iconic images: moonlight, magnolia trees, and mint juleps. More seriously, the lost cause is its interpretation of the American Civil War that seeks to present the war from the perspective of the Confederates in the best possible terms. Developed mostly by white Southerners, many of them former Confederates, the lost cause created and romanticized the Old South and the Confederate war effort, sometimes distorting history in the process. For this reason, many historians have labeled the lost cause a myth or a legend. But it is certainly an important example of public memory, one in which nostalgia for the Confederate past is accompanied by a collective forgetting of the horrors of slavery. This lost cause imagery used to be more popular in films than it is today. It's a central theme of Birth of the Nation. Gone with the Wind, it's touched on some in Gone with the Wind. Now, the author was a Southerner and sympathetic to Southerners, but there's also, I think, an irony in that movie. That the main characters, Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara, are both lukewarm Confederates at best, and in many ways are open scoundrels. Rhett Butler is frankly out for himself, first, last, and always. He laughs at the notion of Southern chivalry. He consorts with prostitutes, and for the most part of the war, he's an open war profiteer. Scarlett O'Hara bemoans the war because it's reducing the number of eligible young men in the neighborhood. It interferes with her love life, and she ends up marrying 3 times, each time for money, with men she doesn't really love. After the war, she enriches herself by using essentially convict labor to rebuild her fortunes. In fact, the most completely sympathetic character in the movie may be Mamie, the black servant, of whom Rhett Butler says, Mamie is the only person around here whose respect I'd like to earn. Now, more modern movies have shied away from any touching of the lost cause mythology and even romanticization of the war. A movie like Andersonville shows the horrors of the South's most notorious pre-war camp. Or Ride with the Devil or Cold Mountain. There's no chivalry here. There's no plantations. Cold Mountain, they reject the Confederate cause. In the Free State of Jones, they even resist the Confederacy, even though Jones is a county in the Confederacy. And we're talking about movies here. This is, of course, one of the iconic images from Gone with the Wind. But as one critic has reported, it features a British, not American or even Southern actress, fake trees, a fake mansion, a fake plantation with fake soil, and a fake skirt. Depictions of women vary in these movies also. In Glory and Red Badge of Courage, women are mostly absent from the movie. They're peripheral in Shenandoah. Scarlett O'Hara, of course, one of the great roles of all time. That's a fully fleshed out character, but that's unusual in the early Civil War movies. Liz Taylor in Raintree County is another, which is a late 40s movie with 50s movie with Montgomery Clift. She's a central character in the movie. Cold Mountain, the women are essentially the central characters in the movies. This movie specifically rejects the Melanie Hamilton, Olivia de Havilland heroism of Gone with the Wind. Lincoln, the movie in 2012, uses Mary Todd Lincoln, as acted by Sally Field, to voice the pain and the hardship suffered by all women in this war. Slavery and emancipation. Now, early Civil War movies did not touch this theme very much, but more modern movies do. Again, the famous Hattie McDaniel, Gone with the Wind, great performance, won an Oscar. They never really ask her what she thinks about slavery. It just seems to be accepted. Glory, of course, addresses this head on. In Shenandoah, the local slaves are freed. The movie Lincoln is driven by emancipation and the abolition of slavery. And here in this more modern movie, abolition is depicted as a noble cause that ennobles everybody who advocates it. Even the political operatives are busy bribing politicians to support it. And while African Americans are prominently portrayed in the movie, debate in the United States Congress among mostly whites that creates the drama in the movie Lincoln. Reconciliation is not usually a theme of Civil War movies, and certainly not that much in the three movies I focused on. When Gone with the Wind, for example, after the war, there's still antagonism between North and South. Again, the picture you see here is of Clark Gable and Leslie Howard returning from what's essentially a Ku Klux Klan meeting. The theme of reconciliation goes to ridiculous lengths in the movie Undefeated, where a Southern officer, played by, of course, the North Shore's own Rock Hudson, teams up with Northern officer John Wayne to fight the French in Mexico. I kid you not. In the outlaw Josie Wales, Wales is hunted after the war by pro-Union guerrillas. In Cold Mountain, there's no reconciliation between North and South because the conflict is between South and South, just like it is in the movie The Free State of Jones. Well, historical accuracy. Movies today are generally more interested in accuracy than older movies. Now, today, at least they get the details right, the technical details. And as I said, I have a lot of friends who have been reenactors in Civil War movies. I knew Brian Pohanka, who was the historical consultant on Glory and some of these other movies. The historical consultants give the directors and movie makers the goods, the accuracy. But the movie makers quite often ignore that in favor of movie making and entertainment. They Died with Their Boots On, a famous Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland movie. Errol Flynn, of course, plays a Northerner. Of course, Errol Flynn is from Australia. He marries Phil Sheridan's niece in the movie. Of course, that never happened. One of the things I'll say in general about these movies is they quite often have Civil War reenactors playing the crowd scenes. And the Civil War reenactors have the details correct, don't get me wrong. But frankly, Civil War actors are usually older and fatter than the average Civil War soldier, who was about 5'7" and 140 pounds. Remember, in these movies, if there's a conflict between the historical expert and entertainment, entertainment wins out. In the movie Glory, for example, they have them charging with the ocean to their left. In the real charge, they charge with the ocean to their right, but it was just a better camera angle. In the movie Alvarez Kelly, they have Richmond completely surrounded by the Union Army, which of course didn't happen. In Cold Mountain, this is filmed using the Romanian army as substitutes for the Union Confederates in the first scene, the Battle of the Crater. That's because the Romanian army doesn't fight a lot of wars, and because their finances are bad, the government rents out the Romanian army to filmmakers. There are no blacks in either army during the opening scene, and the Union soldiers carry a 50-star United States flag. They only carried a 34 or 36-star flag at this time because there were no more states than that in the United States. In the Red Badge of Courage, some of the Union soldiers are carrying a 1903 U.S. Army rifle, not a Civil War era rifle. Daniel Day-Lewis in Gettysburg. Well, if you look in Lincoln, if you look closely in one of the scenes, Lincoln has a pierced ear. I could assure you that Daniel Day-Lewis has a ear piercing, but the historical Lincoln did not. In the movie Gettysburg, they had the wrong U.S. flag. They have a battle scene on a little round top where bullets are flying all over the place. Thousands of bullets are fired. Men are dying all over, yet not one leaf falls from a tree because a soldier cut the branch off. Now there's a whole, if you want to talk about accuracy movies, there's a whole website, www.moviemistakes.com, where you can look up 100 more of these historical inaccuracies. What are the top 10 Civil War movies? Well, here's how two critics have rated them. You'll see that Glory is up there, and Gone with the Wind. Usually, everybody has their own opinion about the top Civil War movie, but I'd say most critics agree with this list fairly much. As I said, I can tell you what is the worst movie: Journey to Shiloh. So that much everybody agrees on. And if you want to know more about this subject, I can recommend two books. One is by the distinguished Civil War historian Gary Gallagher, Causes Won, Lost, and Forgotten. In his book, he explores some of the same themes I'm doing here. It's more of a thematic approach to the war, the movies. And with Brian Will's Gone with the Glory, that's more of a catalog of Civil War movies, one after the other. It's not complete, but it's more of a encyclopedia approach to Civil War movies rather than a thematic approach. So of course, there's a lot of thematic comments involved here. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to me today, and I'll post these posters of some movies on the screen here. And again, thank you for listening to me, and I'd welcome any questions or comments you might have. Thank you.